That's a good start. So when I first started test driving electric cars, getting on for 10 years ago, it was really easy because there weren't very many, so there was nothing to compare them to. And this year in particular is the year of the electric car. There's so many. Here's a good one as an example. This is the Peugeot e2008 GT line SUV. And I actually do like the look of it. I think it's quite a nice looking car, but it is basically another sort of compact SUV. It's a bit bigger. Doesn't feel big to drive, I'll tell you that much. It's very, very manoeuvrable and easy to drive. But it's sort of, you know, a chunky car. I can understand why. It's comfortable, it's easy to drive, it's got good visibility, all those things. But it is basically one of those cars. And if you stand quite near, the doors open and shut. Now it's locked. But if I move here, nothing will happen. If I touch the thing, yeah. So, all that stuff aside, it is what's harder to do now is to differentiate between all these cars. They're kind of pretty similar. This one has one, I was going to say outstanding, it's the opposite, instanding feature that is slightly questionable. But, you know, it's another SUV that really, if I glance at it from here, it looks like a lot of other cars I've driven, particularly this year. This style of car is hugely popular, but it's also, dare I say it, a little bit dull. We've seen loads of them like this. Anyway, this is the Vale of Evesham. That is the Peugeot e2008, and this is fully charged. Initial experience of this car. So it arrived out of the blue at my house. Basically, we were meant to do a review of this car in January this year, and it all went wrong. You know, long story, boring. But so that's why it's very delayed. I mean, this car has been available since June this year, so it's not a. It is a new car in 2020, but it's certainly not new at the moment. And I like the look of this car. When it basically got delivered to my house, and I looked out the window. Oh my God, that's the Peugeot. Oh, that looks nice. I like the colour, and I've driven it now. I can tell 183 miles since I've had it. But this is the problem I have with this style of car, because it's clearly built to have a petrol and diesel engine in it, and then they've adapted it. They've adapted a petrol or diesel car to fit an electric car, and they've done it very well. They've done a good job. It's happened before, we've seen it in other cars, but it kind of makes me, which is why I like the VW ID3. That was never a petrol car, it's an electric car. And that you can have different design features because of that. You know, I'm being picky and comparing it to other electric vehicles because it's not fair to compare it to any liquid fuel combustion vehicle, because they are atrociously appalling. So this is massively better. If you're going to buy a Peugeot 2008 and you're dithering about whether, should I get the petrol one or the electric one? There's no dither. There's no need to dither. You get the electric one, it's better. It's not a little bit better or marginally better, it's much, much better. So Peugeot claim that the energy consumption of this car is about 290 watt hours a mile, which is about 4.5 miles to the kilowatt hour, somewhere around there, 4 and a bit miles to the kilowatt hour. And that's good, that's not too bad, that's pretty good. But what is interesting is that I just saw this mentioned somewhere, that it's fuel equivalent. So if you were comparing the energy, the actual energy, the kilowatt hours of energy that are used in moving this car along, and you compare a petrol version to this, if this was a petrol car with this level of energy efficiency, it would be getting 187 miles to the gallon. And this is an important thing to remember, for me to remember. I think we should always do this. We should always post the equivalent MPG that an electric car gets, because even the worst, least efficient one, I mean, for instance, the Audi e-tron Sportback that I reviewed recently, will have, you know, that's the equivalent of driving at about 150 miles to the gallon in a massive 2-ton SUV. It's still hugely more efficient than any combustion car, and I think that's a really important point to keep making. Apart from all the other negatives of combustion vehicles, one of them is they're massively inefficient. Even when it says they're efficient, and when the advert says it's really efficient, it's not. You cannot. The physics of making an efficient combustion engine don't exist, other than in fantasy sci-fi. You cannot have an efficient combustion engine. They are intrinsically inefficient. Very, very comfortable interior. No criticisms of that. Beautifully made, really solidly built, really good quality. Everything about the interior, I'm impressed with. One feature that I found a little bit difficult. There's this rather nice when you see it, and it always worries me. It's like marketing versus practicality. When you're driving at night, it's got these beautiful thin LED lights that run along the doors and around there. So you've got this kind of, oh, it's beautiful, and it would look really good on the corporate video, the PR video. When you're actually driving, you've got this sort of quite bright blue light, like from here, which is like weird. So I found when I was driving a long way at night, I actually moved my arm to block the light so it wasn't hitting my retinas. It was kind of, and then you think, well, I really don't need that light. I like it coming on when you get in, but it could sort of fade down. It's a thing they could adapt it and do it with software, but that is being picky. And I like it. It's a really nice car to drive. And then, this has really made me think, this car, because all new cars now, they've got to be exceptionally bad before they're not really nice to drive. So the NEDC range for this car, if you look it up, if you Google it and you look it up, is 267 miles on a charge. That is really offensively wrong. It's not like, oh, it's not really 267, it's 240. 200, you could even argue that. No, it's nowhere near that. I've just charged it absolutely full overnight, and it was at 130 miles, I think, when I unplugged it. 130, not 230, 130. And I'm unclear as to how to judge this car, because one of the things it has some peculiar software quirks. So at the moment I can see that it's telling me I have 124 miles of range left. It's perfectly reasonable. I can see it's very clear. It's not a hard thing to see on the dash there, and there's lots of variations of the dash. I'll go into that in a minute. That will stay like that now for at least 15 or 20 miles, maybe more. It'll just say 124 miles. You go, what the hell is that? You know, I don't know how far I can go. How do I judge what's going to happen when it gets really low? For a 45 kilowatt hour usable battery, you should be getting 170, 180 miles. So I'm sure some people who've got these cars are doing that. And what you've got to remember is when I get a car like this, it's been driven by journalists. By motoring journalists who, by their very nature of their psyche and their disposition, have massively heavy right feet. So they will have been thrashing the living bejesus out of this vehicle. So that will lower the computer's analysis of how far it will go on a kilowatt hour. There is no way that I could find a trip meter, and I've Googled it. I said, how do I find a trip meter on an E2008? Because that helps me calculate it. Every car I've driven in the last few years has got a trip meter. If there is one here in this car, it is buried so proficiently. The software engineers have gone, how can we hide the trip meter so profoundly that no one can find it? And you've really got to be like an advanced Russian computer hacker to get anywhere near it. So it's got a 0 to 60 rating of 8.5 seconds, 0 to 60 mph, 0 to roughly 100 kph, 8.5 seconds, vitally important, and top speed of 93 miles an hour, about 150 kilometers an hour. That's all fine. I haven't been amazed by the performance. It's very well managed. The energy transfer from the battery to the motor to the wheels, really smooth. There's no jerking, there's no awkwardness. It is a very, very competent bit of engineering. That works really well. I'm driving along now at let me get down to 50 miles an hour, and I put my foot hard down now. Slight delay. I can feel it accelerating now. I'm at 60. So not breathtaking, but not sluggish. I mean, better than any petrol engine in a car like this. So the performance is comfortably impressive rather than exceptional. Around here, the boot / trunk. Now it doesn't open itself, it's all those things. It's a more economical car. It's actually a very nice case for your charging cable. Would you want to go shopping with your charging cable? You'll look very respectable. I've already taken it out. I've got a bit of shopping in there because I've been out shopping in it, because I'm using the car like you do. That, I will tell you how many litres it is. I mean, it's a nice big boot, 434 litres with the seats up like it is now, or 1,467 litres of storage with the seats down. So plenty big enough, that's good. It's also got an actually very useful whole floor comes up, big space under there, which is where I have kept the cable in the past, but I'll put it back in there now. Okay, so I just want to mention this while I can. I'm reversing in to charge the car. The charge port is on the passenger side on this car here at the back, like a fuel filling cap. It doesn't have a reversing camera. I mean, we've driven some very cheap cars that have reversing cameras. This one doesn't. So you've got to do the old-fashioned way of judging it by the mirrors. Anyway, I've done it. I'm now going to quickly plug it in. I just want to point out again, as I often do on these shows, this car really doesn't need charging, but I always like to try it out just to see that it all works as it should do. So it took me a while to understand why it's called the GT line. So there's all these variations. So this car, the Peugeot 2008, you can get the petrol, you get the really super basic, super cheap. The cheapest version is the petrol one or the diesel one. Those are cheapest. And then you get the special GT line, GT, which is the highest end petrol one you can get. So that's a really flash one, at the top of the line market. It's got all the extra trimmings, the heated seats, the heated steering wheel, the flash screens, the variable cruise control, the lane assist. They pile it all in there, and then it costs 10 grand more. Which is the kind of really awkward thing about all these cars, because they generally, electric cars that are made by legacy automakers, so everyone basically other than Tesla and Chinese companies that only make electric cars, all their electric cars are the flashest, highest end they can possibly do, which is part of the reason they're more expensive. Why can't you buy an electric version that is the plodder's analog dull version? It's got nothing. It's not got a radio. It's got nothing. Which is in a way one of the reasons I like the Seat Me. It had no trimmings and it was much cheaper. This car is kind of really flash. It's got everything added to it except range, which is actually what you want with an electric car. If they'd managed to work out how to give it another, it's not even that much, another 60, 70 miles of range that was reliable in the winter, that's what you want. 180 to 200 miles range just wipes the board then. There's no argument. This one, it's really around 120 mile range, which is not, I argue against super high range, massive batteries. Don't really need them from experience, but this is just on the cusp of going, hang on a minute, this is a real pain. I've got to charge this much more than I normally would. So charging the E2008 is very straightforward, absolutely standard. That's why I want to have a go. A couple of features though. One is the little button there, which I do like, and the Kona has this as well. So like when you set a timer on the car so that it only charges after a certain time at night, to have cheaper electricity, if you need to change that and like you just plug it in and you just want to change it, you have to get in the car and go through the menus and switch it off and all that stuff. But you don't with this, you just press that. So there's a little button there that presses that overrides the timer and it'll start charging straight away. That's a good little tip. I'm just going to stop it charging. Why doesn't it have somewhere approaching a 200 mile range is more than adequate? I don't care what anyone says, if your car will do around between 160 and 200 miles on a charge, that is enough for 99% of people. EV Database, which we're in partnership with, who we trust, and what they have said is it has 155 mile real world range, mild weather, careful driving. Now that is more plausible to what I'm seeing, because it is getting up to the sort of 130 miles. When I first had it and charged it up, it didn't even get to 100 miles on a full charge. It was 98. So it was sub 100 miles. That is a 2011 Nissan Leaf with a 24 kilowatt hour battery. That is not good for a car that has a battery that is literally twice as big. So it can charge at 100 kilowatts, which is really good. Obviously, it's not going to charge at 100 kilowatts now because it wasn't empty enough. You need to be fairly empty to get 100 kilowatts in the car. And for those of you who've never used a charger like this before, a rapid charger, the rapid charger estimates how much power it can give the batteries. It talks to the car. Here's another little thing, the little cover that you put on your CCS charging socket extension, which is the bit at the bottom. That's got a little cover. The top one doesn't have a cover. Doesn't need it. And that's actually an extra bit of hassle to pull that off. So there's no charging cover on that. So, you know, as you can tell, I'm not blown away impressed with this vehicle. It costs $28,650 after the government grant in the UK, which is not bad. It's going in the right direction. These cars are getting cheaper. So when it comes to talking about cars, one of the important things is the lean factor. It's just for me. I like to lean on a car. This is very comfy. This is good height, good shape for leaning on. I feel very confident leaning on the e2008. A couple of more points about it. It's not built for towing. You can't tow a car with it. You know, so a lot of people ask about that. It's one of those things. It has got roof rails. It has got ISOFIX for two child seats in the back. You know, that's about it. It's got a nice sunroof. You know, it is a lovely car to drive. I really want to underline that. It is really nice as a driver. It's nice as a passenger. My wife's been a passenger in it, and she said, "Oh, I like this one. It's comfy." That is honestly massively high praise. You know, it's all those things are good. It's just that it's a transition vehicle. So I think there was a long time when legacy automakers would make a car because they really had to, because they were forced to by governments and by city councils because they knew they weren't going to be able to. They had to, you know, they had to do it. And a lot of those cars were compliance cars. They made as few as they possibly could. They leased them. They charged a fortune for them. They put off people having them as hard and as long as they could. They held back as long as they could. They've changed. That era has gone. They know they've got to make electric cars. They're making them much better. This is way better than any electric car would have been 5, 6, 7 years ago. It's much, much better, but it's still got the fossil fuel mentality hangover in its kind of makeup and the sales pitch and the interior and what they're trying to do with it. And I'm just waiting for a legacy car maker to do a stripped down, different consciousness. It's going to be a generational thing, a different designer, a different engineer that build a car that isn't a bit like an old petrol car. It's nothing like it, and that's what we really need. So that's my only reservation, that and its range, which is not really that impressive, but it's still incredibly usable and still massively better than the petrol or diesel version of the same car. So that's enough. The e2008, don't love it, but definitely don't hate it. Don't hate it. Think it's a pretty nice car. I mean, I'm looking forward to I've got another couple of days with it, so I'm going to be driving it all the time. And I choose to drive it. I could go out in my Tesla Model 3, but I'm not. I'm going out in the e2008. Please do subscribe to the Fully Charged channel, because that really helps us. The channel is growing very fast. We're really thrilled about what's happening with it. Please have a look at the Patreon link that is in the description beneath this video, because the people who support us on Patreon are really critical, and that has kept us going this year, which has been remarkable. Have a look at the fullycharged.show webpage, because that's got all the information of everything we're up to, and we're up to quite a lot. There's all sorts of nonsense going on. And have a look at the YouTube memberships. Remembered, the YouTube memberships. Oh yes. And tell your mates or your friends or your family, if you want to find out about electric cars, watch Fully Charged. That's amazing. That's really number one. That's number one. I should have done that at the beginning. We might edit that and cut it and put it in the beginning. Anyway, that's all. As always, if you have been, thank you for watching.